back into the cryptoverse.
Look at this. This is huge news. Benjamin is usually very correct about his predictions, but XRP, could it really hit $5 to $10?
Today, we're going to talk about XRP, and we're going to be looking at the risk metric. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium process on it.
So yeah, he's been calling that XRP will be only a few weeks, but that was like he was calling that XRP above $3 will be just a few weeks, right? And this was back in July, if I remember correctly, or May. So it was more than a few weeks, at least compared to the past, because the lawsuit is now over. And if we go over here, he's actually talking a lot about XRP and Bitcoin.
What you want to look for. You don't always get double bottoms with altcoins, so I don't want to imply that that always has to play out. But whenever you do have double bottom setups on an altcoin with its Bitcoin pair, it's usually a pretty good sign. Also, if you can couple it with kind of a similar time frame, right? Like if you look at this was June of 2024, and then like November. If you look at the cycle before, right, you can also see a low here in June and then another low in.
So all of these lows are exactly when the lawsuits were still in effect. So just keep that in mind. You know, I'm very open-minded, but we got to keep those in mind, that these lows that we saw with XRP Bitcoin pair, basically how much XRP you need to pay to get one Bitcoin. Very important factor here is they were happening during the lawsuits. And I feel like the lawsuits definitely affected the price, since they also had to sell during that time.
November. Now, that was not a double bottom, but it did lead to a nice spike. This one was a double bottom, and the spike was a lot higher. What's interesting is it just went back up basically to the same level it went to, 4 years previous. Now, right now, XRP Bitcoin is nearly at the same valuation, if not the exact same valuation that it was at in August of 2021, right? So in August 2021, XRP was at this same.
So this is August 2021, and XRP is worth same as you could get Bitcoin for, basically. Like if you wanted to swap to Bitcoin, or how much XRP has gained compared to Bitcoin, it's literally the same level. And I feel like this is also because the lawsuit being over, we saw, the lawsuit basically boosting it back to the original price where it should be. That's all the gains we saw, from 50 cents to $3.
Satoshi valuation, believe it or not, right? I mean, it was. And, obviously I've talked a ton about Bitcoin dominance this cycle. And, to be completely honest, a lot of the loudest critics that I had for the Bitcoin dominance views that I had, like I was constantly promoting Bitcoin dominance. And I did say that dominance would likely find some resistance here at that 66% level up here, and then drop, and then probably rebound in late August. But a lot of the people that really wouldn't accept that and were always calling for a big dump were also really bullish on a lot of these altcoins, and including XRP. What I'm trying to say is that you don't have to just be blindly bullish on all these altcoins nonstop. One of the nice things, you look for these double bottom setups, right? So this has already played out this cycle, but in the future cycles, if you're watching an altcoin.
So yeah, I'm definitely hoping that, compared to Bitcoin, again, I'm best hoping for Bitcoin, but that XRP would grow more than Bitcoin's prices right now.
Lead back to Bitcoin, and then you're like wondering, well, when is it going to turn around?
What are your thoughts on holding with XRP? I'm going to check this right now, and holding XRP historically has never been bad decision. If you hold at least for 5 years. That's what I'm a firm believer of. That there's so much money in the world, like as long as if you hold top 3, which are Bitcoin, Ethereum, and XRP, they're bound to grow eventually compared to the markets. But again, it depends on you how long you will hold and if they will actually outperform the stock market. Now, stock markets are going to grow much less, but they are almost guaranteed in history, like the last 200, 100 years or whatever, they were guaranteed to grow.
One of the things you could look for is this double bottom pattern that some of these altcoins get against Bitcoin. That shows you a good sign for a nice rally. So XRP, technically speaking, is still well down against Bitcoin since 2017. Most things are, right? Even Ethereum is down against Bitcoin since 2017. In fact, it's a very similar pattern, if you're being honest. But the point that I'm trying to make is a lot of people have sort of reached out and they've said like, well, where's XRP going to go? And why does it keep stalling out, around these levels? Well, the reason why I think it hasn't really been able to sort of push higher is because the risk, right? The risk of XRP, not like the fundamental risk. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about based on what it has historically done.
So historically, it has dropped. Like, this is where Benjamin is a bit bearish on XRP. Again, I love Benjamin. But the one that historically has it dropped is actually during, like, the first time it actually went up was post, like, it dropped much faster, in my opinion, or had much less high because $500 million had to be sold. And we have to consider this will, of course, affect the price. Like 2018 was an anomaly because this is when literally crypto saw its first major run.
Based on what it's historically done, the risk on it has remained relatively high. Now, this is basically blue.
See, that's the risk. Like when it's red, it's basically say to sell. But I don't believe this risk metric personally right now. Like this metric for me is not that scary. If you guys can't see the screen, it is red, just like here. It's between orange, yellow, and red. But again, what we're seeing here is XRP historically has not been the same. It's been much different than Bitcoin and Ethereum, in my opinion.
With 0 and red is 1, and you want it to be you want to be buying assets when they're at low risk levels and then selling when they're at high risk levels. If you take the color code out of this and you just look at it like this, you can see that XRP has sort of spiked into the 0.8 to 0.9 risk band a few times now. And every single time it does, it ends up just getting sold off. Now, technically, though, I mean, you got some higher lows here, but I would say that, I would say two things. If over the next few months, if XRP does go to the 0.9 to 1 risk span, I think it makes sense to run for the hills, right? Like, again, just look at all these major tops by XRP, right? Anytime it hits that highest risk span.
That's historically, right? So historically, we are already almost at that level. We're at 0.7. And if it hits 0.9 or 0 or even a 1, usually the price starts to crash.
That's it, right? You don't want to sort of sit around and wait, because usually after that happens, it's not good, especially considering we have likely a 2026 bear market coming up. If you look at 2014, you can see that.
So yeah, he's calling for a 2026 bear market, which kind of scares me, to be honest.
That XRP dropped quite a bit, right? So think about it like this. Look in 2014, and I think I might need to actually find a different exchange here to use to actually look back a little bit further. I'm not sure which one. I think it was. I'm not sure which one on here still has it going all the way back. Probably this one does. Not really sure what that wick is. But if you look at 2014 for, I guess this is the this is basically when it first came out. I mean, there wasn't really any movement on it, right? It was just that. But in 2018, XRP dropped about 80%, and then in 2022 it dropped about 60%. So it probably makes sense to assume that it will drop in the year of 2026.
So that's what Ben is calling, like XRP dropping in 2026. I feel like if that happens, the whole market will drop, not just XRP. So listen very closely. He's been right a lot of times, and he's calling the whole market will crash in 2026. Again, not financial advice, but I'm a bit worried for 2026. I'm always bullish on 2025. 2026 is when it really gets me worried, because we don't actually have any positive news or any big news coming up, and that's when usually historically the prices drop.
And so I would say one of two things, right? One of two things. One thing is if XRP does go to the 0.9 to 1 risk span sometime in the next 5 months, especially if it goes all the way up to 1 risk, that's probably it, right? Pack it up and we'll see you next cycle. Um, if it doesn't, right? If it doesn't get up there, there's still a chance that it could, but by the end of the year, and really, you could argue, very beginning of January at the absolute latest, if it still hasn't gone to that higher risk band, then there's a good chance it probably isn't going to, right?
So people calling $10 XRP this cycle do not understand these charts, and it's very important to know that the realistic price point, in my personal opinion, compared to this market cycle, is $4 to $5. And a lot of YouTubers are saying $10,000, $20,000, $1 million. It's not possible this cycle, in my opinion. Even $10 is gonna be very, very hard, especially with this cycle. Historically, obviously the government is changing, but historically, $10 again is gonna be a hard push. That means each single millionaire is now gonna have 3 million. Of course, we are gonna see a lot of market sell pressure,
and it'll just top out at a lower risk band, right? Because there is a reality of like it doesn't tend to spend that much time at the higher risk levels. And so, there's a chance that it's just spending a lot more time at these higher risk levels rather than just getting a spike very briefly up to an even higher risk level. Like if you look at the time in the wristbands for something like XRP, you'll notice that it's only spent 35 days in its entire history in that higher wristband. So if it happens, it's not going to last for very long. And if it doesn't happen, it's just because it's spending so much more of its time in this wristband right here, which normally it doesn't either, right? Like normally it'll just kind of spike up and then be done with. It's been staying a little bit more elevated this time.
That's because of the lawsuit over. Probably it's been a bit more in the red, which means it's been like more risky. A lot of the whales are buying it because they're expecting at least a 25% increase. In my personal opinion, why would the whales be buying like millions of XRP? That's my question. If they feel like XRP is gonna be dropping, could someone explain me like why are the whales buying every single coin below $3?
So if you look at it,
maybe is it to sell like a 350?
If you look at XRP on its Bitcoin pair, this is actually a very similar pattern that we had last cycle at this exact same time, right? Like, let me switch this back to a log scale. Basically what you had was this like, this big run up and then a big dump, kind of the same level, and then another spike, but then it sold off again, right? It sold off again. And this would actually line up with the idea that Bitcoin dominance is going to likely bounce here in September. And September is a month where dominance normally changes direction from whatever.
So yeah, this is what I agree with him. Bitcoin dominance, which I told you guys, basically means that XRP September is going to be bad. A lot of my viewers on this channel, this is what I've been warning them. But October is when we get like that final push.
Whatever direction it's going. So I would argue that you're likely going to see a pullback by the XRP Bitcoin valuation in the months of September and October. That's what I would guess. You can also see, by the way, in 2021, that around the same time, XRP was heading to its 20-week SMA, right? It ended up bouncing in September around its 20-week SMA. The 20-week SMA for XRP right now corresponds to about $2.57, $2.67, right? So let's just call it around 260 to 270. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see XRP check in with that bull market support band in September, probably even wicks below it like it did.
So yeah, he's calling for XRP to have a major point around September. Now, this kind of correlates with no news. I didn't find any pretty big news in September. Obviously, it's the ETFs in October that really changed my mind. And you guys know I do this full time. So September is kind of correlating with my news as well. There's no news at all that's really going to change in September. Like we saw a lawsuit last month. That's why price really changed. We saw literally the government promising us to buy crypto. All of this news really pumped up. But now,
or highs,
not same level.
In that time period. And this cycle, it's actually been putting in, at least we've got two higher highs, right? So if XRP comes down here to the bull market support band in September and then finds support and then bounces, if it does go to a higher high and then you see that risk metric for XRP in the 0.9 to 1 wristband, that could be it. Now I know you got a lot of people out there putting.
Yeah, so he's saying like $4 is the where XRP could stop. And I'm not that worried about that. I'm just worried when people are calling $5 to $7. Like $5 to $7 is realistic if every single scenario in crypto that we've been hoping for goes correct. $5 to $7. Like, but $4 is basically what people are expecting and hoping for. Now, 5 to 7, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below as well.
Out crazy price predictions and whatnot, but that always happens, near the end of longer cycles, right? Like the bull.
Could this cycle be different because the government, is like more bullish on crypto because of regulation, AI, tech? Maybe that's why it could change. Who knows?
Market, right? When you're near the end of these multi-year bull markets, like we have been, you'll see all sorts of crazy predictions. So just be aware that, if there's a pullback in September and then there's another run in Q4, don't fall for all the crazy price predictions, right? Try to be a little bit more level-headed with that kind of stuff, because that's the issue with any altcoin is people throw out all sorts of crazy price predictions and then they just disappear.
I kind of agree with him. Like, there's people calling $700 per XRP coin in 2025. Like, that's the most major, like, it's just impossible. If it's gonna be $500 by the end of the year, you know what's gonna happen to the market cap? It's literally gonna be more than the US dollar.
Over that time frame will likely be the market cycle top for it this market cycle. And I think it makes sense to keep an eye on the risk metric. And if it hits that higher risk metric, higher risk band, that's probably it. And if it keeps not hitting it, then there's still a chance it could hit it for at least a few more months.
It's very difficult to create a prediction, especially with higher ups predicting high price. That's very true. That's the thing. XRP never had ETFs, right? So that's why, like, at $4, XRP had a lawsuit. That risk metric, XRP had no rate cuts at that point. I think they had actually rate cuts, but they had no ETFs, which is a big inflow. There is a lot of stuff that could push it to $5 or $6, but we should be careful at $4. And it's exactly as I told you guys. The support level is what's really, changing everything. So I'll keep you guys updated on that. Smash that like button as well.